Good morning, everybody.
Hey,
Well, today we take up gate 42 of the 108 gates of Dharma illumination. And that gate reads, Love of Dharma illumination is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we attain Dharma illumination. So that's kind of a mouthful. Doesn't seem to say very much. So we've got three things in this gate being translated as Dharma illumination, but the kanji for all of these three things is not the same. So somehow, we've had Dharma illumination three times, but if we look underneath that, there's something else happening. Two of those Dharma illuminations are actually prajna, or wisdom. Um, so there's that, and then there's this thing about love of Dharma illumination. This thing being translated love is actually the word for seeking or pursuing, motometa. Which is, you're pursuing something, you're seeking something. So, I mean, we get why it's become love, but it's not love. Okay? So, all of these three instances of Dharma illumination with love thrown on top is one translation, but I think we can look at it, a little bit differently. So last week we talked about our aspiration to understand the meaning of the Dharma, which is related to emptiness. This week we're talking about our aspiration for prajna, which is also related to emptiness. So this gate is about how do we seek wisdom? How do we seek prajna? How do we work with our aspiration for prajna? So again, we're going to be spending some time with emptiness because this is related to the things that we talked about last week. So, this time we get to talk about prajna, what that is, how we think we need to go after it. So one of the most basic elements of Buddha's teaching, of course, is the Eightfold Path, and that's where we probably had our first introduction to prajna. When we first came to practice, this may have been like the first place where we encountered it. In the Sutta Nipata, among the earliest of Buddhist scriptures, the Buddha says, one who possesses the strength of wisdom, born of the moral precepts and restraints, who is tranquil in mind and delights in meditation, who is mindful, free from attachment, free from fallowness of mind and intoxicants, is called a sage by the wise. So he's describing here the three parts of the Eightfold Path, right? Because those 8 elements fall into 3 categories or fall into 3 groups. 3 aspects of our practice. We have wisdom or prajna, we have shila or precepts, and we have samadhi or concentration. So all the Buddhist traditions have these 3 groupings within the Eightfold Path. So clearly prajna is at the basis of our practice, right? It's something we encounter pretty early on. So what does that look like? Well, at Sanshin, it looks like zazen, work and study. It looks like the 3 elements of our practice, right? Within the Eightfold Path. So for instance, in the before times, we had a practice period, and the way Hojo-san constructed that practice period from the very beginning was that it would include all 3 of those elements. So there was a sesshin for the zazen portion, there were work days led by Hoshin that were the work portion, there was a genzue, which was the Dharma study portion, right? So we had all these 3 elements of prajna, shila, samadhi. So during the shutdown, of course, it's a real challenge to keep practice going in all 3 of those areas. Some of it we can do together, some of it we need to do on our own. We can't practice together, but still we need some balance with those 3 elements. So the prajna section of the Eightfold Path includes right understanding, sometimes called right view, and right intention, sometimes called right thought. These things are translated in a bunch of different ways. But if you're looking at a listing of them, it tends to be the first 2. So in early Buddhist teaching, Eightfold Path is a linear thing. You do one and you do the next and you do the next. It starts with leading an ethical life so that we can settle down, actually sit properly, so that we can have some insight, we can have some wisdom. So we needed to do one thing in order to get to the next. So Zen and Mahayana in particular, of course, doesn't look at it that way. It doesn't look at one thing leading to another. It looks at all these elements arising together. So all the elements of the Eightfold Path are happening together. They're kind of dependent on each other, being practiced together. But we can pull out, the prajna section and kind of talk about that, understanding that it's really not separate from all the other elements of our practice, all the other elements of the Eightfold Path. We just need to recall or be mindful that we're not doing something in order to achieve wisdom, right? We're not doing all of these things so that we can somehow get prajna. We're also not getting prajna in order to do the other things. These things are all arising together, right? We frequently heard Dogen's teaching that practice and awakening are not two, and this is a good example. Here it is, right here. So right understanding means we understand what Buddha taught about the nature of suffering, about how delusion arises, and all the things that unfold from that. So that pretty much encompasses everything else, right? It pretty much encompasses the entire practice, the entire tradition. Certainly emptiness, impermanence, no self, interconnection, three poisons, all that stuff is right there in this one element, right, of the path, this one element of right understanding. So it all comes back to the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the most basic kinds of teachings. So being ignorant about how this one unified reality actually works, we know, is the source of our delusion and the source of our suffering. Somehow we don't get how things are actually unfolding. So, of course, we can't think or live or act in alignment with that. It's the basic source of our suffering. The flip side of that is when we do understand what Buddha was teaching, our own suffering doesn't arise and we don't perpetuate suffering on other beings, right? So once we have some suffering, if we can see into the nature of that, we can let go of that. And if from the very beginning we understand what Buddha was teaching, then our own delusion and suffering doesn't arise. Right intention is the second piece of this prajna element, sometimes called right thought, because the next two elements of the path are right speech and right action. And we know that body, speech, and mind, or thoughts and speech and action, are the three places we create karma. So this is the basis of all our activity. What happens here, what comes out of our mouths, what we actually do with this body. So we can see how right speech, right action are related, and they all come together. So right understanding and right intention arise together because when we see ourselves clearly, we see what this self is, we see the universe clearly, so we see what's happening around us. We don't get caught up in our delusive thinking. And then our motivation moves away from gratifying the sort of craving and grasping and aversion of the small self, and it moves toward doing what's wholesome for all beings. So we really get a much broader view. We can let go of our self-involvement to a certain degree and start to see, what do I need to be doing for the rest of the universe, for the rest of the beings in this universe? So within the Eightfold Path then, understanding and intention are prajna, right? That's that piece. So according to Dogen, of course, seeking after prajna simply means doing zazen, or at its core means doing zazen, right? Because he says it's nothing other than dropping off body and mind. It's nothing other than shinjin datsuraku. So sitting in zazen, watching our thoughts come up, opening the hands so we're not grasping those thoughts, not clinging to ideas about anything, either ideas we came in with or ideas that are arising during our zazen. We're just being there, right, in the middle of the universe with no separation. We've dropped off all the boundaries. We've dropped off all the distinctions. So prajna is what's there when we let go of our thoughts and just get out of the way. So there's nothing we need to go get. It's what's already there when we just get out of the way of its natural arising and functioning. So, of course, one of the places that we most frequently encounter prajna is in the first line of the Heart Sutra. For us on Sundays, we might be most familiar with it during the World Peace Ceremony, but if we're doing morning practice at Sanshin every morning, we're doing the Heart Sutra. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing prajna paramita, clearly saw that all five aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. Whatever translation you're used to, or the Japanese. So Dogen wrote about this line in Shobogenzo Makahanya Haramitsu. He wrote an entire fascicle about the Heart Sutra. And he writes, of course, about this first line. He says that not only is clear seeing itself prajna, the five aggregates are the fivefold prajna. So form, feeling, perception, formation, consciousness are themselves five forms of wisdom. Then he says that the six senses coming into contact with the world and giving rise to perceptions are 18 more instances of prajna. And the Four Noble Truths are 4 instances of prajna, and the paramitas are 6 instances of prajna. And he goes on to say that various other lists of all the things in that sutra are all instances of wisdom, instances of prajna. So where the Heart Sutra goes through the list of things and seems to say this doesn't exist, that doesn't exist, there isn't suffering, origination, stopping path. So it goes through and negates all of these core, essential, important Buddhist teaching. Dogen's coming along in the Shobogenzo and saying all of those things are actually instances of prajna. So this is, where we come right back to emptiness, right? Because Heart Sutra is all about form and emptiness. So again, quick review: emptiness or suchness or thusness is the teaching that no conditioned things have a separate, permanent, fixed self-nature. So there's nothing we can point to in anything we encounter, whether that's an idea or a thing or a person or whatever. There's nothing there we can point to and say, that's the fixed, essential, unchanging nature of that thing, because everything's in flux all the time. So there is emptiness because there is impermanence. All the causes and conditions that lead to things are changing all the time, so the things that are arising from that are also changing all the time. So there's nothing we can grasp and say that's it. Also because of interconnectedness, emptiness arises, or emptiness is there, because where is the boundary between one thing and another, right? Everything is dependent on something else, so nothing has any separate fixed self-nature which is not conditioned by everything else around it. So there's, again, nothing we can point to and say that's a distinctive, separate self-nature. So nothing has a separate or permanent self-nature. Prajna is about seeing that emptiness. It's about getting right into the middle of that emptiness. Well, we're already there. It's about seeing that we're right in the middle of all that emptiness and kind of understanding what's going on. So as we started to talk about last week, there's emptiness right there. So how do we seek prajna? How do we learn to understand emptiness and stand up right in the middle of emptiness and see what's really happening? So Hojo-san says, Zazen itself is prajna, seeing the emptiness of all things as they are, without our mind's incomplete map of the world. In the first sentence of the Heart Sutra, we can clearly see that prajna is something to practice. It is not a technique for using our brain. In this practice of prajna, we have no subject and no object. Everything is just as it is. Avalokiteshvara is nothing other than the five aggregates. Five aggregates see the five aggregates as empty. Avalokiteshvara sees himself as empty. So we see what Hojo-san is referring to when he frequently says five skandhas are grasping five skandhas. Five skandhas are clinging to five skandhas. In the Heart Sutra, five skandhas are five forms of prajna, and they're not clinging to anything. Therefore, Avalokiteshvara sees himself as empty. So aspiring for prajna means we study ourselves and we study the universe by getting on the cushion and by carrying out the other activities of the Eightfold Path. That's our aspiration, to seek prajna. So in other words, zazen, work, and study are all gateways to prajna. So zazen is important, but it's not the only one, right? They're not actually separate things, this zazen, work, and study. All of them are manifestations or gateways for prajna. So we have to be careful about thinking that prajna is a sort of a special mystical thing. It's only available to celestial beings or Buddha 2,500 years ago, or that it's kind of locked up in books in a library someplace, and is inaccessible to the average practitioner. We can't actually get it from somebody. We can't get it from a book. We can't learn it by studying Dogen or studying what Hojo-san says, or really anything else, because it's very much about what we're doing, just living in this moment. What are we manifesting in this moment? What are we actualizing in this moment? That's where prajna is. It's not out there. It's not something we have to study and learn. So Kodo Sawaki says, by seizing the sword of wisdom with its prajna point and diamond flame, we seize life afresh, authentic life at face value here and now. So this is very much about what am I doing in this moment, not about something I'm going to study and get at some other time. So he's evoking the image of Manjushri here, right? The bodhisattva that represents wisdom. So prajna is not an intellectual wisdom that we get from memorizing stuff. Just like emptiness, it's not anywhere other than right here and now. So emptiness, prajna, all of that is actually already right here. So it's not being practiced by some beings other than us. We don't need to appeal to some other beings to hand us prajna or to take us into emptiness, right? All of that is right here. So Manjushri is wielding his sword right here. Here we all are, being Manjushri. So, this is what it is to be a bodhisattva, right? Manifesting prajna, moment by moment by moment. So we are not separate from Manjushri in that way, or Avalokiteshvara either, or any of the other bodhisattvas in our tradition. So our Dharma cousin, Tonin O'Connor, who will be here September 6th giving the talk, has also written about this whole thing. She says, we tend to think of bodhisattvas as magnificent beings, nearly as awe-inspiring as Buddhas and remote from our confused lives, forgetting that the definition of a bodhisattva is someone who has generated the aspiration to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. We become bodhisattvas the instant our hearts and minds open to our interconnectedness with all beings, and the aspiration rises in us to free all beings from the conditions that constrict their realization of the full possibilities of their lives. So she's saying, here we are. Bodhisattvas are already here, and they're us. So here we have right understanding and right intention, right? As soon as we understand the realities of interconnectedness and impermanence, our intention or our vow is to free all beings from suffering. So as soon as we have that insight, and we really see we are interconnected with everything, everything's impermanent, we see where suffering comes from, we understand what Buddha's talking about, right in that moment, immediately the aspiration arises to help all beings, because we can't help it, right? We're already connected, we're already in the midst of that, so we don't have to go very far to see this aspiration arising already, to manifest our wisdom by liberating all beings. So it's nothing other than the arising and manifestation of prajna. So it's something we're actually doing all the time. This is, we might make some vow or recognize our aspiration for prajna, but it's not something we're doing at some later time. We're doing it all the time. Simply by practicing, we're manifesting prajna all the time. So Tonin goes on. Bodhisattvahood begins with a response that takes us beyond the confines of ourself. In that moment, we step onto the path, of course, although, of course, not as perfected bodhisattvas approaching the wisdom and compassion of Buddhas, but more likely as not sure I know what I'm doing bodhisattvas, falling down and getting up bodhisattvas, stumbling along bodhisattvas, but bodhisattvas nevertheless aspiring to enlightenment for the sake of all beings. So it is as us the Heart Sutra is pointing to when it says bodhisattvas rely on prajnaparamita and thereby attain unsurpassed, complete, perfect enlightenment. So I love her description of us as stumbling along bodhisattvas. Hojo-san would say baby bodhisattvas, right? So are we manifesting prajna perfectly in every moment? Well, no. We're still finding our way in some sense. But that doesn't mean that prajna is not there, and that emptiness is not there, and that we are not actively working for the good of all beings. So she ends here with this mention of relying on prajnaparamita, which we're familiar with in the Heart Sutra. So to rely on prajnaparamita means it's something that's already there, right? We can't rely on something that's not already there. So as Tonin says, we're not perfect. We're not fully actualizing everything moment by moment, or as Hojo-san would say, we're baby bodhisattvas. But nonetheless, we have that first glimpse of what the Buddha was teaching. And when we have that first glimpse, then prajna is already there. So, based on that prajna, then, we want to keep going. We want to keep practicing, and we want to keep working for beings and liberating beings from suffering. So we're aspiring toward prajna at the same time that we're already relying on prajna. So there's something a bit circular happening here. Then our job is to actualize this already existing prajna. So our effort is not to get prajna or go out and find it or learn it or memorize it or something. Our effort is in how do we actually live there? How do we actually manifest that moment by moment by moment? So, of course, one way is sitting without grasping for any kind of result. As Uchiyama Roshi says, in Zazen, which actualizes prajna, there should be no gaining, no mushitoku, right? So, in simply sitting our Zazen, dropping off body and mind, not trying to get something out of it, already we are actualizing prajna, according to Uchiyama Roshi. But basically, really, everything we do with compassion and wisdom is a manifestation of prajna. So wisdom is not only about, what's here. It's also about how are we in the world. Are we also manifesting compassion along with that wisdom? When Dogen writes about the Heart Sutra, he says that Avalokiteshvara is practicing prajna with the whole body. So when he's writing in Shobogenzo about the Heart Sutra, he says Avalokiteshvara is practicing wisdom with the whole body, not just this, right? It isn't enough just to have an intellectual kind of wisdom. Prajna actively uses the mind and the heart and the entire body for actualizing itself in the world. So Hojo-san says, to see things as they are without discrimination is prajna. Avalokiteshvara clearly sees the reality of all beings without discrimination and performs skillful means to help each and every being. This is the functioning of wisdom that is compassionate activities. So one of the ways wisdom actually makes itself known is in our compassionate attitude toward all beings and toward the universe. So it's not only what are we doing that we think might be smart. It's like, what are we doing that's compassionate? Because that is also wisdom. These two things are not separate. We can't really pull them apart. So this is related, I think, to what Tonin was saying. As soon as we see interconnectedness and we understand that we need to help all beings, in that moment we become bodhisattvas. So wisdom and compassion arise together, and in that moment, bodhisattva life is there. So if prajna is seeing with the eyes of Buddha, or seeing everything without discrimination and seeing that everything is empty, then there should be myriad opportunities in a day to manifest prajna, and of course there are. We don't have to look very far to find opportunities to manifest wisdom and compassion. So one example is at mealtime. And in the formal meal, when we do in the temple, or maybe during a retreat or something, when we do a formal meal, we chant, "May we realize the emptiness of the three wheels, giver, receiver, and gift." So that's just another way to talk about prajna. There's the earth and the right causes and conditions for growing the food, and somebody grew the food and tended that food and harvested it and got it to wherever it needed to be for distribution. Somebody bought that food and cooked it and put it on the table, and that's all that piece about the giver, of giver, receiver, and gift. Then there's you or your family or your friends accepting the food as a way to support your practice, and that's the receiver piece. And the food and everything that went into making that meal possible is the gift. So we have giver, receiver, and gift, which is a wheel. So with prajna, we recognize that all those three wheels of giver, receiver, and gift are empty of any kind of fixed nature. So although we see there's a farmer, and there's a tractor, and there's a grocery store, and there's a bowl of food in front of me, and there's a sink full of dirty dishes at the end, and we see those individual forms, but we also see their emptiness, right? We see the giver, receiver, and gift are all empty. So we let go of our craving. We let go of our aversion. There's nothing about any of that we can attach to because of the emptiness, right? So we let go of the craving, the aversion, the three poisons, the delusion, the suffering, attachment, all that stuff. So mealtime is a great opportunity to really look closely at how that happens, but we also know all of that is transferable, right? So what goes on in our mealtime practice, we can transfer to everything else during the day. Anytime we are giving, receiving, or noticing that there's a gift, we get to practice that again. So Hojo-san says we should practice giving, or dana, without attachment to this person or to that thing given. That is called the emptiness of the three wheels. That is the way when you practice dana paramita. In order to practice dana paramita, we need wisdom, or prajna paramita, which sees the emptiness of self, other people, and the things given. So we can see how wisdom and compassion arise together and are necessary for each other. In order to be generous, we actually have to have prajna, right? We have to see how giver, receiver, and gift work in order to be generous without attachment, without clinging, without, there's something in this giving for me, right? We need prajna in the midst of all of that compassion. So these two things have to go together. So as long as our practice is based on three poisons, then we have ignorance. Particularly ignorance about emptiness, ignorance about the emptiness of everything we encounter, including all beings. So without prajna, we have attachment. We have craving, we have clinging, we have aversion, we have all that stuff, right? When we see emptiness, we're released from attachment that might already be there, and also new cravings don't arise. So, or maybe don't arise as quickly or as strongly, right? So when we see into how things actually work, we get to let go of the craving and attachment and the stuff that kind of keeps us bound up, and then also we get to prevent new craving, new aversion from arising. So within our prajna, we see that there is really nothing to which we can become attached. Because of emptiness, what can we actually attach to? There's no self-nature of anything that we can cling to. Anything we grasp is going to change. It's going to come and go. It's not separate from anything else. So deciding we like this and don't like that in a way doesn't make sense, right? So we get to release our cravings and our attachments. So when that happens in Zazen, it's shikantaza, right? It's just sitting. It's sitting without anything extra. All the extra stuff we load in there. Whether it's, things happening about our zazen, gee, I want something out of my zazen, or it's a thought that arises during our sitting. Oh, after sitting, I'm going to go get a sandwich, right? It's like we're always grasping after something. So if we're sitting in zazen without that kind of grasping, if we're sitting in the midst of prajna, that's shikantaza, like for real. That's real shikantaza. But of course, that's not the only place to practice prajna. Anytime we're able to see all sides of reality in the midst of whatever we're doing, then that's actualizing prajna. Anytime we're not stuck somewhere in one particular viewpoint or caught up in our own needs about, I need for this to go a certain way, it doesn't matter that the universe is going to do what the universe does. Whatever we're doing during the day, when we can see more than one side, we get to get a broader view of reality. In that moment, we're actualizing prajna. So if I'm about to have an argument with somebody and I can take a step back and say, well, now wait a minute, what's the other person's point of view? Right there, that's a manifestation of prajna. So can we maintain the broadest possible view? Doesn't mean we don't get to have an opinion. Doesn't mean we don't stand up for things we believe in. But can we see the totality of that circumstance? If we can, that's doing kind of out in the world what we're aspiring to do in our zazen, in our shikantaza, right? Dropping off body and mind, dropping off extra stuff, seeing kind of as broadly as we can. When we do that, then samsara and nirvana are both there, right? Then they're both really the same. So, we're practicing with this limited body and mind and with our limited understanding and all the hindrances we have in this human condition. And at the same time, prajna and emptiness and the complete functioning of the universe are already there. So samsara and nirvana are already there. Can we see that? Or are we only, kind of stuck in our own point of view? So this sameness of samsara and nirvana is one of the most important teachings in the Prajnaparamita literature. And you may know, there's a whole body of literature in our tradition having to do with Prajnaparamita. So the Heart Sutra seems to be negating all of Buddha's teaching. It seems to be saying there's no Four Noble Truths, there's no Eightfold Path, no 12-fold chain of dependent origination. It's saying that even those teachings are empty. And we can't cling even to what Buddha was teaching, or even what our teachers and ancestors have said. When we see that, that's prajna. So studying Buddha's teaching in order to let go of Buddha's teaching is the way we practice. That's one of the ways we aspire toward prajna. So if we can do what Avalokiteshvara is doing in this sutra, seeing that we ourselves are empty, then we're practicing Prajnaparamita. We see that we're nothing more than 5 skandhas, and that somehow this impermanent collection of skandhas tends to cling to the idea that it's a permanent thing. So as soon as 5 skandhas come together and there's a human form, then those 5 skandhas are clinging to 5 skandhas and saying, I'm a thing, I'm a separate thing, right? We don't know how that happens, but somehow, 5 skandhas are clinging to 5 skandhas. And right there, that's where our suffering begins. That's the beginning of the whole thing. So when we see impermanence, and we see there's no fixed self, we can see that ignoring all of that stuff leads to our suffering. Ignoring the realities of emptiness and impermanence and no self. All of, just sort of pretending that doesn't exist or being ignorant of it is what leads to all of our suffering. So one of the most important sources on prajna is the Prajnaparamita Sutras, of which there are about 40. They're some of the earliest teachings in the Mahayana, some of the earliest texts in the Mahayana. So one of the sutras says, a bodhisattva is a being that experiences everything without attachment and sees reality or emptiness, or thusness or suchness. So the practice of prajna is central to the nature of being a bodhisattva, right? We're constantly taking vows, formally or not, about being bodhisattvas. We're always talking about being bodhisattvas. The whole point of our practice is to be a bodhisattva and liberate beings. So this is really central to being a bodhisattva. According to these sutras, prajna is at the center of this thing. So it comes down to 5 skandhas not attaching to 5 skandhas. Right? Can we somehow dissolve that clinging of 5 skandhas to 5 skandhas? That's kind of the central project, right, of being bodhisattva. So aspiring toward prajna and taking bodhisattva vows are the same thing. So in an interesting way, what this gate is saying to us is reinforce your bodhisattva vows by aspiring toward prajna, aspiring toward manifesting prajna. So these two things are really deeply connected. These are not different at all. Prajna is the basis for how we do our bodhisattva work. It's the basis for how we liberate beings. So we'll see a bit later how it's also the basis for being a Buddha. So this is really central stuff. There's an image in the 8,000 line sutra, 8,000 line Prajnaparamita Sutra, that I particularly like. I think it's really helpful. It's the bodhisattva standing in emptiness by not standing on anything, whether conditioned or unconditioned. So the bodhisattva stands in emptiness by not standing on anything. Somehow that's a really interesting, helpful mental picture. And yes, I'm grasping a picture there. I just think that's a helpful description. In other words, when the bodhisattva relies on Prajnaparamita, he or she is not relying on anything. So the sutra goes on to say that the bodhisattva wanders without a home. In other words, without attaching to the ideas and the stories that we write based on what comes in through our senses. So here's the original, homeless practitioner. We go forth somehow when we ordain as clergy. We're going forth from home, and we talk about a homeless life. We talk about ancestors like homeless Kodo, who never settled down in one temple. He was teaching by moving around. This is the original homelessness, right? These are bodhisattvas not standing on anything, not grasping anything, clinging to anything. According to the sutra, they wander about without a home. So on that basis, then, they're not setting themselves up for suffering because they're not clinging to stuff, right? So standing up in emptiness by not standing on anything is to dissolve our suffering, or at least not to set ourselves up for suffering. So those ideas and stories, by the way, include things like form and emptiness are not two, and there is no fixed self-nature, and now I'm practicing prajna. All of our ideas about the teachings, about what Buddha said or our teachers have said, all of those things are also something we're clinging to. We can't stand on those either. So we're now back again to this idea that we even need to let go of what Buddha taught. We need to take it in, and it's pointing towards something important, but in the end, we have to let go of that as well. So all those things are important teachings, but the bodhisattva doesn't stand on those and make a home even in the midst of the sutras, even in the midst of practice and what the Buddha was teaching. So as soon as we find ourselves grasping something, we get to go, oh, wait, open the hand, move on. So as soon as we're clinging to a teaching, or we're clinging to something a teacher said, it's like, oh, wait a minute, no, move on. Open the hand, move on. So it's like we're telling ourselves not to play favorites, which I think is an interesting way to approach our practice. How do we approach our practice without playing favorites? We get to see each thing without discrimination. So when it's time to bow, we bow. We may not like it, but we bow. When it's time to put on the robe or get on the cushion or eat the meal or walk the dog or whatever have the board meeting, whatever it is, that's the thing we're doing. We get to let go of discrimination. We get to not play favorites. Like I'd rather be doing this instead of I'd rather be doing something else instead of this piece of my practice, right? I think it's a helpful way to approach something. How do we approach our practice without playing favorites? So we get also then to have compassion and wisdom for everything equally. We don't get to pick and choose who deserves my compassion today. Who do I help with practice today? It's like, no, we don't get to play favorites. The wisdom and the compassion are available for everybody equally. So we get to see everything clearly and not just what we want to spend time with and just, who we want to help. We get to see the whole catastrophe. So sometimes we hear prajna referred to as the mother of all Buddhas. And back when I was in Milwaukee, every Mother's Day, my talk was about the mother of all Buddhas because it seemed to be an interesting tie. So prajna is the mother of all Buddhas. Why do we have that connection? Well, because you have to see all things with the eye of prajna in order to manifest Buddha nature. So we have to have prajna in order to manifest as Buddhas. So prajna is the mother of all Buddhas. It's the basis for all the Buddhas. So from the point of view of prajna, we treat everything as our children, right? So this is how Buddha sees us. We're all Buddha's children. So ideally, parents don't favor one child over another, right? So they have wisdom and compassion for all their children equally. We get to be the same way in the world. We get to see everything as our children. We get to have wisdom and compassion equally, for flowers and for weeds, right? For my lovely pet cat and for the skunk, that gets, hit in the road. We get to have wisdom and compassion, whether we like or not. Somehow all of our children are equally deserving of wisdom and compassion. And in fact, the sutras say things like Prajnaparamita itself sees all the dharmas and discerns their true nature. As a result of this great merit, it is called mother. So Prajna and Buddhas actually arise together because you need the wisdom I to be a Buddha. And when you're a Buddha, you see everything with the wisdom I as a matter of course. So these two things are arising together. So the practice of prajna is not a way to get to something else. We don't practice wisdom in order to get smarter, or in order to become people we like better, or to get something called awakening or enlightenment. Practicing prajna is a description of how we live when we're completely standing up in emptiness and not standing on anything. So in that way, I think it's like the precepts, and the precepts are a description of how we live in the midst of awakening. I think practicing prajna is the same. It's how we live. It's not something we're doing in order to get to something else. The point of the Heart Sutra, I think, is to keep us from getting stuck anywhere in the midst of that practice of prajna. So it's like, wanting to get something out of our practice, or wanting to cling to the teachings and use them as a permanent yardstick somehow to measure our experiences or measure our actions or something like that. Even Buddha's teachings aren't the whole story, right? I mean, whatever he says is only a part of the complete workings of the universe. Because words are limiting, right? And we know sometimes he would give one teaching to one group and turn right around and give a different teaching to a different group. And people would say, why don't these things match? You can't describe the entire working of this one unified reality in a set of teachings. So we know, even the things Buddha said, even the stuff written in sutras, even the things that our most beloved teachers have said, are only part of the story. So we can't cling to that. We have to go beyond it, right? We have to use the teachings to transcend the teachings. Or the way I learned it, early on in my Zen practice was use the form to transcend the form. So, yes, we engage in the forms, we study the teachings, we're in the midst of our practice, and yet we don't cling to any part of our practice because we know all that stuff is only part of the story. So clinging to anything, even Dharma teachings, is a problem. And that's what our prajna, practice of prajna, is helping us to work with and let go of, not to cling to something. So you want to grasp form, feeling, perception, formation, consciousness, right? In emptiness, prajna says they don't exist, so we can't cling. You want to grasp what comes in through the senses. Well, that stuff doesn't really exist either. You want to grasp the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Nope. Can't cling to those things anyway, right? So anything you want to pick up, prajna says put it down. Anything we want to pick up, anything we want to grasp, cling to, prajna says put it down. Use it, see that it's there, interact with it, that's great. But put it down, right? So don't deny it, don't reject it, don't suppress it. Don't separate from it, don't ignore it, but don't carry it around. Don't stand on it and think, well, this is firm ground, because even what Buddha taught, if we don't treat it properly, if we don't understand it properly, it's not firm ground, right? There's nothing we can cling to which is firm ground. So in Zazen, we get to see how that kind of mind feels. What does it feel like when we stop bouncing from one shiny toy to another? What kind of spaciousness is there when we stop, chasing and clinging and grasping and running away? What does it feel like when we just rest in something that's sometimes called choiceless awareness? How about if we're just sitting? There's just shikantaza, there's just sitting, and there's no choice being made. Because as soon as there's a choice, it's about discrimination, and we're chasing something and running away from something, right? So what does it feel like to sit in the midst of choiceless awareness? That's an interesting place. It's a spacious place. Usually we don't have that luxury. If we're out in the world, we're making choices all the time because we have to, just like for our own safety and for the safety of people around us and just to get our bodhisattva work done. We have to make choices and discriminations. When we sit in Zazen, we get to let go of that. We get to sit in choiceless awareness. We get to stand in emptiness, not standing on anything, not relying on anything. What an interesting place to be, right? When we describe it intellectually, it kind of feels a bit scary because this human nature says, we want to cling to something. We want some kind of anchor. We want some kind of yardstick. We want some kind of handrail. Well, in Zazen, we get to go, it's okay to let go of that, and it's perfectly safe. We're not in a free fall that's going to end in catastrophe, right? We get to let go of everything and just say, okay, what happens if I'm really not relying on anything? What happens if I'm only in the midst of prajnaparamita? And what does that feel like? You know, that's an interesting thing. It's an interesting approach to our practice. So our aspiration for prajna, or for wisdom, is not about acquiring knowledge or acquiring experience or anything that we don't already have. It's about letting go of the stuff that gets in the way, right? Prajna is already there. So in order to get through this gate about prajna, we have to put down all the extra baggage that we're carrying. We have to kind of leave that by the side of the road. Then we get to go through this gate. Because if we're trying to get through this gate clinging to stuff, it's never going to happen, right? We get to put everything down by the side of the road and kind of leave it there for a while. Because if we don't do that, we're going to miss this gate, even though it's like right there. So what would you like to say about prajna, or anything that's come up this morning, or how it feels to be a bodhisattva standing in emptiness by not standing on anything? What's on your mind today? Sagan.
Yeah, I recall a quotation, I think it's from Kodo Sawaki, it might be Uchiyama, I'm not sure. But he says, we should settle the self on the self.
Mm-hmm.
How does that, could you speak to that a little bit in terms of what you were saying about not standing on anything?
That's interesting, isn't it? That is Uchiyama Roshi, settling the self on the self. Yeah. So I think if we're settling, so I can't remember when it's written, are both of those selves capitalized? I want to say yes.
I know the second one is
The
capitalized.
second one is, and I can't remember, I think, so I can't remember if the first one is or not. If the first one is not, then he can be talking about we're settling the individual self in the midst of the universal self. So, you know, right in the midst of universal self, we can recognize there is, you know, a person, but that there's no actual boundary, right? So I think it could be an interesting description of the bodhisattva standing up in emptiness by not standing on anything, right? If both of those are capitalized, then it feels to me like he's saying, come home to this universal self, this emptiness, this suchness, this thusness, right? So just settle in the midst of that by letting go of all of our ideas about self and other and having preferences and playing favorites and all of that. So I think it's not unrelated to prajna. I haven't looked to see did he actually equate settling the self on the self with prajna, but I think he's very much talking about prajna when he's talking about that. Absolutely, yeah. What do you think?
Well, I haven't thought about it too much yet.
Let's see if others want to weigh in on that or other things. I think it's very relevant. I think you're absolutely right. What would others like to say? I can see the tops of a few people's heads. I know you're out there.
I just wanted to go back on something. Early in your talk, you said something, and I wasn't quite sure I heard this correctly. A stage by the wise?
Oh, let's see. A sage, S-A-G-E, sage.
Sage, okay.
So this is the piece in the Sutta Nipata, where the Buddha says, one who possesses the strength of wisdom, born of the moral precepts and restraints, who is tranquil in mind and delights in meditation, who is mindful, free from attachment, free from foulness of mind and intoxicants, is called a sage by the wise. So he's saying, you know, those who practice the Eightfold Path have something going on.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a stage. So yeah, I'm sure that seemed strange when I went on to say none of that is linear. Because that feels like, well, that's a stage in our practice, right? Is that okay?
That's good, thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions people would like to ask or things you'd like to say? How you practice with prajna?
Something that I've been thinking about is that it's, as you say, prajna is not out there. It's not something to grasp, not something to go after. And the way I think I look at it, try to look at it, is a more of a reductive process. I mean, it's kind of like opening the hand of thought and letting the things go. And So that process constantly going reveals the directions that we're tripping up on, or that may be right. So that's becomes the activity of wisdom, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. So again, I think it's this circular thing, right? We begin, we have some bodhicitta, we have some arising of aspiration to practice, and I've got to think that there's some prajna already there, or the bodhicitta wouldn't be arising. Right? Somehow we see that there's a unified reality and that there's a universal self and an individual self, and we have some aspiration to practice, right? So this whole set of teachings about nothing extra, I think, is really helpful, because we know because of our karmic conditioning, right? Thoughts are coming up, things are coming up. We're burning our old karma because we have to. It's got to unfold in some way, right? So it's like we're constantly looking into that and like, what's going on there? What hindrances are coming up? What's hindering me from completely manifesting Buddha nature or completely manifesting prajna? And it is, I think, a case of constantly sort of peeling that away. And we also know I'm going to peel off this little veil of delusion, and not only is that delusion going to come right back, but there's three more right behind it, because our practice is incomplete and always will be. This is vow and repentance, right? We vow to manifest prajna, we vow to be bodhisattvas, we vow to stand in the middle of emptiness, and yet because of this conditioned human form, we're going to make mistakes, right? So I think it is constantly about opening the hand and letting go of and letting go of and letting go of. And when we start practice, I think we start that at a kind of a gross level. When we start to practice, we see the big suffering, we see the big three poisons, and we go, oh, wait a minute. And over time, I think it becomes more and more subtle. So we get to the things that really are deeply held that we, kind of unearth. And we kind of see this thing, oh, wait a minute, that too is based on three poisons. Oh, that too is based on a mistaken understanding. I can let go of that too. So I think it becomes more and more and more subtle. So I think you're absolutely right that it is a case of letting go, letting go, letting go, letting go, and that we're never actually done. I think when you see really experienced practitioners, you see people in the Sangha or people in the world of Zen practice that you really admire. Maybe it's a teacher, but not necessarily. And it's just somebody who's clearly been sitting for a long time. And there's something about that person you just go, I want to be like that person. You just feel like they've let go of a lot of stuff. They just don't get stuck, they don't get trapped. Or if you're sitting having a conversation, with a really good teacher, and that person immediately sees where you're stuck. You're complaining about what's, you're suffering with or what's going on with you. Maybe you're in Dokusan, but maybe you're just having tea, And they go, have you seen this? And you go, that's it. That cracks the whole thing open for me, right? I get to let go of that too, right? Even though it's something that's like way down here. And then you get to see, oh my gosh, like a branch, things with ivy, it's like, oh, if I let go of this, then there's all this stuff that falls away too, right? All of that is prajna. So I think prajna is indeed about letting go of things. We have some sense that there's some wisdom here. There's some compassion already here. If we could just get out of the way of it, right? If we start to let go of our stuff, it gets a lot easier to help the people that maybe we don't actually, personally like so much. Or it gets easier to do those activities that, that's maybe not our favorite thing to do. It's like, but I don't have to struggle with that. I can let go of that struggle. That struggle is based on something which is, it's a hindrance. It doesn't have to be in the way. I can let go of that. Letting go, letting go, letting go, letting go. I think it's very much tied up with opening the hand and Shinjin Datsuraku and just dropping stuff away. I think that's why it's part of Shikantaza, right? Just sitting with nothing extra. Do you want to follow up, Hoshin, with any of that?
Yeah, I actually do. I'm remembering back a few centuries ago when we were all sitting in the temple and we were having tea, and I sat down because there'd been something rolling around in my head, and I sat down next to Hojo-san. And it was the first time I began to equate prajna with wisdom and what that is, and that it comes out of for lack of a better term, and a term that I actually like, is vastness. So, or that, we've said it a couple of different ways, like the unreactive stillness, And you said it another way, well, when we're not stuck, prajna is suchness. And it's, there's so many different ways to say it. I'm wondering if I could read a little something. It's something that Katagiri said, and it's from I think the last book that came out of his, The Light That Shines Through Infinity. And the wisdom of emptiness. Originally, we are completely vastness. In the vastness of the universe, there is no dichotomy, no discrimination. There is perfect peace and harmony. Philosophically speaking, this is called emptiness. Sometimes vastness is personalized, and it's called Buddha. If you experience that emptiness, it is called Buddha nature. Plainly speaking, it is the universal consciousness. Before you start to think, your life is already present there. So if you want to realize the truth of life, all you have to do, as best you can, is stand up straight and walk around. So,
I love it. He just gave my whole talk.
yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that in. That's terrific. I always laugh because he always talks about peace and harmony. Everything from him comes back to peace and harmony.
Yeah.
In the midst of emptiness, there's peace and harmony. It's that's terrific. What a great quote.
Yeah.
I'm glad you had it there. He just gave my whole Dharma talk, and better than I could, and in about that much space. That's brilliant. I love it. I love it. Anything else people would like to say this morning? Sagan.
Yeah, it's just a little connection. I mean, I'm reminded of that saying of Bodhidharma when he was talking with the emperor. He said, "Vast emptiness," the notion of vastness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about that. We talked about that quote last week, right? About vast emptiness, nothing holy. So again, he's saying there's nothing we can stand on. There's nothing. If we're going to be bodhisattvas, because Emperor Wu thought he had done lots of things because he built lots of temples and all of this stuff. Well, even that temple building, even those practice activities, in the midst of vastness, there's nowhere we can stand. Other things folks would like to say? Questions, reflections? Risa, good to see you.
Good to be here. Thank you. Something that you said really reminded me of an experience of my own that I just wanted to share. Talking about the thought of standing on nothing and how scary that seems. And for a long time, when I was first meditating, I found that I felt panicky about giving up words. If I tried not to be thinking in language, it was scary. And it took me a really long time to get past that. And it was just the oddest thing that felt frightening to me, that I couldn't be clinging to words when I was meditating.
Well, for you, that was your job, right? So, that was a big part of your self-identity, was the ability to use language. So that makes perfect sense to me. That would be something which is really scary to give, because it's very deeply tied to who you are and how you are in the world. And it's the most basic thing you use. I know for me, also a communications professional, I, for a while, was actively taking it as my Zazen practice to notice when I was talking to myself. Because you can't tell, right? I am highly verbal. It's like, you can't shut me up, right? Even in my mind, I'm sitting, and as fast as I'm trying to let go of, so I'm noticing what I'm letting go of is fully formed sentences. I'm having entire conversations, which I'm editing in my mind. I'm just thinking, this is crazy, right? So I actively tried to be in a place before language, which was really not easy for me. And I didn't find it scary, but I did find it really difficult, because this is how we cling to our experience and how we make sense of things. So, when I'm like doing disaster spiritual care, because one of the things I do with the Red Cross is, go to disasters and try to help people. And one of the things we learn in disaster spiritual care is that one of the ways that humans make sense out of something like a disaster is that they verbalize it. And so you have to just let people tell that story over and over and over and over. And it's not that they need to communicate information for anything other than this is how they're making sense of that experience for them. So, I don't find it strange at all that in the midst of Zazen, we're trying to make sense of that experience or the experience of the day by putting language around it. And then when we don't have that, how do we work with it? How do we experience it? How do we integrate that into ourselves, right? So it's a really interesting opportunity in Zazen where we know we're safe. We're not in free fall. We're not going to get up off the cushion and take some unskillful action. We know that Zazen is a safe place, and the zendo or your home, sitting place is a safe container for that work. And then we get to start dropping stuff. But yeah, this is, I think, another reason why Sangha is really important. Because we're all doing this project. We're all doing this thing. We've all had some kind of scary experience with it. And we all can understand each other's fears and anxiety and kind of challenges around that. So, doing Zazen with others, even from time to time, is kind of an important thing, or at least to know that others are out there doing this crazy practice. So what you say makes complete sense to me. Absolutely.
Actually,
oh, please, Risa, go ahead.
Just another comment about this is the few times I have actually been able to experience that spaciousness from having dropped it off, it's a relief, actually.
It's a big relief. It's a big relief. You're absolutely right. Sagan, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of mention, it's interesting that traditionally in China, I don't know if you want to say the description of Zen was a special transmission outside words and letters. It's interesting, that particular saying, outside words and letters.
Right. Well, and I think that's another great example of using the form to transcend the form, because we encounter that, quote, perhaps early on in our Zen careers, and we think, oh, that means I shouldn't study, I shouldn't have Dharma talks, it means that my own experience is the only, real yardstick. Well, I think what he's saying is, use the form to transcend the form. Do the study so that you can let go of the study. And use the words so you can let go.
It's kind of interesting, too, because those are words in themselves to describe that. So.
Exactly. You can't get away from it. So we know this is the finger pointing to the moon, right? We know that we can't cling to the words. We can't cling to the teachings. We take them in, we work with them, but we're, taking that raft from one shore to the other shore, and then we're putting the raft down. We're not carrying the raft on our backs, into the landlocked part of the territory, because, it won't help. So we're using the words to transcend the words, or using the form to transcend the form. Other things people would like to say? Questions, reflections, things to add? Everyone good?
Yeah, this is Nate.
Hi, Nate.
Sorry, I got my camera off because I'm still in my bathrobe.
Okay, well, we're seeing an interesting picture when it's got your wife's name on it, so it's good to know.
Hi.
Hi, Iris.
I've always felt that Zen practice to me, was like climbing out, on the end of a tree branch and then cutting the branch off, and there's a strange kind of faith in all of that, is all of these particular tools we have that get us to nowhere, and that is somewhere. So it's a strange practice, but for some reason I just keep doing it. I just keep doing it. And I was reading Katagiri yesterday, and I came across, I'm just gonna kind of paraphrase it, but it was I think when you first approach practice, I think you treat it like a vending machine where we put a coin in and we expect to get a Pepsi Cola out. But as we practice, gradually, we realize that when we touch the coin, it is a Pepsi Cola, and so I like that idea, and practicing non-self and settling the self on the self is just sort of that's something that I feel in my body when I sit zazen. I really feel it in my body, and settling whatever I'm carrying with me from the day or my experiences, and settling it down into this larger experience. So that's all I have.
Well, that's dropping off body and mind, isn't it? We
Yeah.
get on the cushion.
Yeah.
As soon as we have no separation, that is settling ourselves and the cares of the day right smack dab into the middle of the universe, because we're no longer holding them as separate. So we feel, some tremendous relief, because we're not carrying those things in a kind of an inflexible, constricted way, right? I like the image about, going out of the branch and then cutting off the branch. We have lots of those images in our tradition, right? Taking one step off the 100-foot pole, all of these things which, mean somehow we jump out into emptiness, knowing that we've been standing there the whole time. But, every time we let go of something, we're climbing that tree and cutting off the branch, we're stepping off the pole, we're letting go of the raft. I mean, there's just all these, because where else in our normal lives would we ever do something like that? I mean, it's crazy. Nobody would do something like that. And yet our practice says you can, because you're perfectly safe. Sit in zazen, drop stuff, you're fine, and you're a more authentic you than you are if you're not dropping stuff. And I mean, it just feels completely backwards to us. So, it takes some courage, I think, to do this practice. And Sangha and Bodhicitta help a lot. Sagan, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think this scenario of sort of cutting off the branch or stepping off the pole or whatever is exactly what's described in that formula. 1 equals 0. So you're going from 1 to 0, and then 0 is going to infinity, to the whole thing.
Yep, I think you're right. I think Hojo-san is describing that exactly, and we're back again to 1 equals 0 equals infinity. Get your T-shirt today. We have them online. You can carry that teaching around with you all the time. Other things people would like to say or add. We've had several good additions. Okay, everyone all right? Okay. All right, let's pitch back to Hoshin. He's going to do some closing announcements. Thanks for a very good discussion today, and next time I think we see Tone in here, so please give her a warm welcome. Thanks for your practice this morning.